Hello, welcome to part 3 of the Spotify Name Displayer. In this video, I will guide you through on how to display the current song name from the Spotify web app to the local LCD screen. If we skip the song on the web app, the LCD screen will also display the name of the next song. A controller knob will also be featured in this video, where in theory you should be able to use Spotify's web player functions such as play, pause, and skip, but since Spotify Premium is required, this section will not be explained thoroughly. Currently, the device only supports the exit function on the board. There is another limitation on this device, where currently this device only allows these characters from the font table to be shown on the screen, as the 1602 LCD module only provide basic ASCII characters to be shown in their default settings. This video will be separated into two sections. First, we will talk about how to print the song name onto the LCD screen, and then we'll talk about how to show the interface while the song name is still showing the screen. Before following this video guide, make sure to watch my previous videos on Spotify API and LCD screen to understand how to use them in the W5100S-EVB-Pico 2 board. Note that an additional rocker module is added to this project for controlling the device. Follow this connection diagram to connect the module to the board, where the horizontal axis is bounded to GP26 while the button press is bounded to GP15. Now let's go back to our CircuitPython codes. First, start by initializing the use of GP26 as analog input and setting GP15 as a count.io input. Using count.io counts the number of changes that the joystick button has been pressed. In the initialization, I have used edge.fall to count whether the button is pressed because for the button, the initial state is high and the press state is low, which indicates a fall motion. Difference between digital I/O and count I/O is that count I/O helps memorize if there are any presses, while digital I/O will only contain the value of current state. Next, let's initialize some variables. The function player list is used to print functions available inside the function page. The power variable helps turn on or off the device. Lastly, the timer is to simulate a countdown clock and helps prevent the display to make too much request in a time frame and reduce the number of refreshes on the LCD screen. Next, let's change the scope in our program. To obtain the current song name and some playback function from Spotify, we need the user current playing and user modify playback scope. Go back to our code on initializing the scope list and add the other scopes to it. Note that changing the scopes will let Spotify ask for authorization on the device again after clicking into the URL. Now let's code our main display function. When the power is on, we first run the interrupt function to check if there are any button presses. If there are no button presses, the interrupt function will only reset its own parameters and will do nothing to the song name display function. Next, set the headers for calling to the API. According to the Spotify web API page, your headers should include your token with the bearer keyword in your authorization key. We can now make a request to Spotify for the song name. As we initialize our main timer as -1, I decided to make a request and display the song name every time the timer is less than 0. Reset the timer first, and then clear the current message on the LCD screen. Make the API request afterwards. On the Spotify API page, the endpoint URL is as follows, and the other two headings can be ignored. Next, we check if the Spotify web player is opened or not. When we post a request to the API on getting the current playing track, if the Spotify player is not opened, the request will return an empty response. We can check if the response is empty by checking if the status code is 204 or not, as this response status code refers to a successful request without a body. I initialized a status code of 204 outside of the main function to check the code. If the response is not empty, we will then store the play state and the song name. The play state variable is used to show the song name only when the web player is playing. If the player is paused, I displayed a off message on the LCD screen. Here is an example of how the device should work. If the player is playing, we can then print the song name. Referring to the API page, you can get the song name by accessing the item key and then accessing the name key. Here is a demonstration on the Spotify player returns to playing the song after pausing. The section for displaying the song name is completed. Let's deal with the case when we get an empty response. For my program, if the player is closed, I want the display to show that Spotify is disconnected and turn off the power. Here is an example of how the device should work. I then turn the power off to close the device, and also close the response for the call, as I will not use it anymore. Lastly, I decrease the counter to reduce the time and use a sleep function to delay 0.5 seconds for every loop. The main function is completed. We can now code our interrupt function. The button on the rocker module acts as an interrupt button, and pressing it will show the functions page when the song name finishes printing. First, start by setting the variables outside of the scope that may be altered as global. The refresh timer here helps reset the timer in the main display program if a button press occurs and users goes to the function page. The power will change to false when the user chooses to quit in your function page. The pressed count referred to the button on the rocker module, and since we have initialized the button in the outer function, we will pass the global keyword to it, as we will change its value inside this function. After that, initialize some local variables for the scope. The function player choice is used to identify which index of the function list we are currently pointing to. The interrupt timer is another simulation of a countdown clock, and if the value goes to 0, it means that user idles too long on the function page, and it will return to displaying the song name. Here is a demonstration of the upon function. Let's now walk through the codes if the button is pressed. In the count.io object, we can access the number of fall instances by accessing its count variable. If there are any instances of fall transition, we first reset the timer on the main display program and reset back our number of fallen instances to 0. Resetting the count is essential, as we will check if the player chose anything inside the function page by pressing the button. Next, we display the first option on the screen, which is pausing the player. If the idle timer has not been reached, we keep on running the function page until either the user chooses something on the page or idles for too long. If the rocker module reaches the upper threshold, the timer will reset and the choice will be updated to the next function on the function list. We now do the same for the lower threshold and update the choice to the previous item in the list. Next, we check if the user chose any function during this section by checking the count variable of the countIO class. Reset the number of presses of the button, and now we decide how each function works. As the only function available is quit, as we do not have premium, if the choice is off, we simply make the power false. In my program, I have also provided a template to allow pausing on the player, but it would not work in our program as we don't have premium. First, let's define the headers for pausing the player. According to the Spotify API, the headers are as follow with the endpoint URL. Note that for the put request, we will also need to include the content type and the content length to update the player state. As there are no data to be sent to the endpoint, simply make the content length as 0 and set the type as application/JSON. Next, we can perform the put request. From the API page, calling the put request will contain error with the reason of premium required. Therefore, I display the message of premium required onto the LCD to notify the user that Spotify Premium is required for this function. Here is a demonstration on how the device should work. We now suppose we have Spotify Premium, and we successfully pause the player. According to the Web API, if the Spotify player is successfully paused, it should return an empty response with a status code of 204. We then check the response status code and write a pause message on the LCD screen. Lastly, close the response. For the skip function, the template is similar as the API request and response is the same, but with a different URL endpoint. For resuming playback, the body section of the put request will require more data than the rest of the functions, but since I can't do any testing on the device, I decided to not include the template in our program. In my program, I have decided to ignore the skip and start function by printing a message to the serial on the editor. Lastly, reduce the timer and call a sleep function to simulate a countdown clock inside the timer while loop. This concludes the interrupt function. In the end, write a message to the LCD screen to notify if the device turned off, and also write it on the serial. The Spotify Name Displayer project is now completed. Thanks for watching. I hope that by this project, you learn more on how to use Spotify API on CircuitPython, operate I2C devices on the W5100S-EVB-Pico 2 board, and make your own device like this. Additional videos about refreshing tokens and other related videos may be featured in the future. Feel free to comment down below if you have any questions. You can find my GitHub link and related websites down in the description below. As Spotify requires payment in order for their API to work, I will try to find new music platforms that supports free API calls to control their player and do an updated video with it. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you soon.